Look at you, not running from yourself anymore, not arguing with your own mind, not pretending certain parts of you don't exist. That internal war, it ended. And the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was alignment, because the truth is, you didn't become darker. You became honest. Honest about your limits. Honest about your instincts. Honest about the parts of you that used to whisper warnings while you forced yourself to stay polite. For a long time, you were taught something subtle, something dangerous, that the acceptable version of you was the only version allowed to exist. The calm one, the forgiving one, the endlessly patient one. But life has a way of exposing incomplete identities, especially after betrayal, especially after manipulation, especially after being underestimated one too many times. And when that exposure happens, something awakens. Not rage, not cruelty, clarity, a sharper awareness, a colder sense of self-protection, a quieter refusal to tolerate what once drained you. Most people panic when that side of themselves appears. They suppress it. They label it as too much, too intense, too distant, too different. You didn't. You paused. You observed it. And instead of rejecting that version of yourself, you understood it. That is where everything shifted. Because the moment you stop fighting your own depth, you stop being internally divided. And an undivided mind is extremely difficult to destabilize. Think about how you used to operate. You would over-explain, over-give, overanalyze people who gave you minimal clarity. You questioned your instincts. Second, guessed your boundaries, doubted your own perception just to maintain peace. But now, there's a new internal voice, quieter, sharper, less emotional, more observant, not hostile, just aware. It doesn't scream, it doesn't panic, it doesn't chase approval, it evaluates. And that internal shift is what they never predicted. They assumed pressure would fracture you. That exposure to conflict would confuse you. That seeing uncomfortable truths about people would make you collapse emotionally. Instead, you adapted. You stopped denying what you sensed, stopped ignoring subtle red flags, stopped forcing warmth in cold environments. And that didn't make you cold. It made you precise. Now, there are two dimensions operating within you. The composed version the world sees, and the perceptive version that reads between every line. Wone engages. Wone analyzes. Wone connects. Wone filters. And the key difference: they are no longer in conflict, they are coordinated. Before, your empathy overruled your instincts. Now your instincts inform your empathy. Before, you gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. Now, you give observation the final say. That is not hardness. That is integration. Because real strength is not pretending to be endlessly soft. And it is not becoming emotionally numb either. It is the ability to remain aware without becoming reactive. To remain calm without becoming naive. To remain kind without becoming exploitable. And that balance is what makes your presence feel different. Now people can sense it even if they cannot explain it. They notice you pause more, observe more, speak less impulsively. Your reactions are no longer immediate. They are measured. And that alone disrupts the expectations of those who once relied on your predictability. Because predictable people are easy to influence. Integrated people are not. Now, here's the deeper shift. You no longer abandon your logic to protect someone else's comfort. You no longer silence your intuition to maintain superficial harmony. You no longer override internal warnings just to appear agreeable instead. You listen inward first. And that creates a level of self-trust that cannot be easily shaken by external noise. Notice how your decisions feel different now. Less rushed, less emotionally pressured, less dependent on validation. You can step back, reassess, detach when necessary. Not out of ego, but out of awareness. Because the part of you that once tolerated everything has now matured into discernment. And discernment is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't justify itself endlessly. It doesn't seek applause for protecting its own energy. It simply adjusts behavior, withdraws where needed, engages where aligned, observes where uncertain. This is why some people feel unsettled around you now. Not because you changed into someone unrecognizable, but because you stopped being internally fragmented. They were used to the version of you that doubted yourself, that hesitated, that emotionally negotiated with clear disrespect, that tried to understand everyone even when no one tried to understand you. Now, there is coherence. Your words match your perception. Your silence matches your awareness. Your presence matches your internal alignment. And that consistency is psychologically powerful. Because when a person becomes aligned within themselves, external manipulation loses its leverage. Guilt works less. Gaslighting fails faster. Emotional pressure loses its grip, not because you became defensive, but because you became internally anchored. You are no longer reacting from confusion. You are responding from clarity. And clarity has a very different energy. It is calm, grounded, almost surgical in how it moves through situations. You no longer need dramatic exits. You no longer need loud confrontations. You no longer need to prove your awareness. You simply shift your engagement. And that quiet shift speaks louder than any argument ever could. Another important truth: you are not suppressing your softer side. You are protecting it. Your warmth still exists. Your empathy still exists. Your ability to connect still exists. But now, it is filtered, intentional, directed toward people who show consistency, not just charm, toward environments that show respect, not just familiarity, toward connections that show reciprocity, not just convenience. That internal filtration system is what gives you emotional stability now. Because instead of fighting yourself, you are finally operating as a unified mind. Your awareness no longer scares you. Your intuition no longer feels like overthinking. Your boundaries no longer feel like guilt. They feel natural, necessary, accurate. And perhaps the most powerful part of you are no longer trying to be easily understood by everyone. You are focused on being internally clear with yourself, which means your energy is no longer scattered between over-explaining, over-justifying, and over-correcting your own instincts. It is concentrated, centered, deliberate. This is why your presence feels heavier now. Not in a negative way, in a grounded way. Like someone who has seen their own depth and decided to stand in it instead of running from it. And once a person reaches that state, where their awareness, intuition, and composure work together instead of against each other, they stop being easily shaken. Not because life becomes easier, but because their internal foundation becomes stronger than external noise. So no, you didn't become colder. You became integrated. You didn't lose your light. You stopped abandoning your shadow. And now both parts of you move in sync, calm when needed, sharp when necessary, warm when deserved, distant when required, balanced, aware, self-directed. And that kind of inner alignment, it doesn't just change how you move through the world. It changes how the world responds to you forever. Because when your inner world stops arguing with itself, your outer world stops confusing you. There is no hesitation between instinct and action anymore. No internal debate every time something feels off. No emotional tug of war between what you sense and what you think you're supposed to tolerate. Now your response is clean, not rushed, not emotional, not reactive. Clean, calm when needed means You don't waste energy on chaos that doesn't deserve your nervous system sharp when necessary. Means you no longer soften truths just to protect illusions. Warm when deserved means your kindness is intentional, not automatic. Distant when required means your peace is no longer negotiable. And that shift is subtle on the outside, but seismic on the inside. Because before alignment, every decision felt heavy. Overthinking second, guessing, replaying conversations long after they ended. Now, there is clarity. Not perfection, not emotional numbness. Clarity. You observe behavior. You assess patterns. You adjust access. Without drama, without internal collapse, without needing closure from people who never offered honesty. That is what balance actually looks like in practice. Not constant positivity, not constant toughness, but precision in emotional energy. You don't give the same version of yourself to everyone anymore. And that is not manipulation. That is maturity. Because different environments require different levels of openness. Different people require different levels of access. Different situations require different levels of emotional investment. And now you instinctively know the difference. You're aware, not just of others, but of yourself. Aware of when your energy drops. Aware of when something feels performative. Aware of when respect is genuine versus strategic. This awareness creates a quiet confidence that doesn't need to be announced. You don't have to say you've changed. People feel it in the way you pause before responding, in the way you no longer over-explain simple boundaries, in the way your silence now carries intention instead of uncertainty, and being self-directed. That's where the real transformation lives. Because you are no longer outsourcing your emotional compass, not to validation, not to approval, not to fear of being misunderstood. You move based on internal alignment, not external pressure. If something feels wrong, you step back. If something feels right, you engage. If something feels unclear, you observe longer. No urgency to react. No desperation to fix. No need to control outcomes. Just calibrated movement, and the world notices this calibration, even if it cannot articulate it. People who once relied on your emotional accessibility sense the difference. First, they notice you're harder to provoke, harder to guilt, harder to emotionally corner, not because you became cold, but because you became center. And centered individuals are difficult to destabilize. Opportunistic energy loses grip. Manipulative tones lose effectiveness. Performative behavior becomes easier to detect because inner alignment sharpens perception. You start seeing dynamics instead of just words, intent instead of presentation, consistency instead of charm. And once you see clearly, you move differently, more selectively, more intentionally, more strategically with your time, attention, and presence. This is where the deeper shift happens. Your presence begins to feel grounded, not loud, not dominant, not performative, grounded, like someone who is no longer internally fragmented, like someone who has already faced their own complexity and therefore cannot be easily shaken by external projections. And that grounded energy changes how people approach you. Some become more respectful, more careful with their words, more aware of their behavior around you. Others, they grow uncomfortable because alignment removes the version of you that tolerated misalignment. You no longer overextend to maintain connections. You no longer shrink to preserve harmony. You no longer explain your worth to people who only understood your availability. Instead, you remain consistent. Calm in tension, measured in conflict, selective in trust, intentional in connection. And consistency creates psychological weight, not intimidation, weight. the kind that makes your words carry more impact because they are not used impulsively, the kind that makes your silence noticeable because it is no longer empty. It is deliberate. Now, here's the permanent part. Inner alignment is not a temporary state. It rewires how you process people, situations, and pressure. You recover faster from emotional disruptions. You detach faster from unhealthy patterns. You recognize red flags earlier than before. Not because you became cynical, but because you became internally synchronized. Your intuition and logic are no longer competing for control. They are collaborating. And that collaboration creates a presence that feels steady, even in unpredictable environments. So when you walk into rooms now, you're not scanning for approval. You're observing energy. You're not adjusting your identity to fit expectations. You're maintaining coherence regardless of the environment. And that is rare, because most people are externally reactive and internally conflicted. You are internally aligned and externally composed, which means the world doesn't just see you differently. It responds to you differently. Boundaries are tested less. Respect is given more cautiously. Conversations shift in tone. Dynamics recalibrate without you forcing anything. Why? Because alignment is communicated non-verbally before a single word is spoken, through posture, through timing, through emotional restraint, through selective engagement. And over time, this creates a long-term effect. You attract fewer chaotic interactions, fewer manipulative dynamics, fewer energy draining conversations, not by force, but by frequency. Because when someone becomes balanced, aware, and self-directed, their tolerance for dysfunction naturally decreases, and the environment adjusts accordingly. So yes, this kind of inner alignment doesn't just change how you move through the world. It changes who feels comfortable around you, who respects your space, who dares to test your limits, and who quietly realizes you are no longer operating from confusion. You are operating from clarity. And clarity, once embodied consistently, is not something the world forgets. It is something the world learns to respond to permanently.